Okay, folks, so I'd really like to welcome Chris Murray from epiGenesys and the University of Sheffield. epiGenesys is a company that is doing commercial work, as I understand it, but it's using undergraduates who are learning how to do software development on real projects. So, big thanks for coming, Chris.
You're welcome. Okay, so first I'll explain that although I'm going to tell you about education programmers at the University of Sheffield, I'm not an academic. I'm working for a spin-out company owned by the university, very much practitioner driven. I'll explain a little bit more about what we do. So Genesys Solutions began around 1993, and it was a student-run company, essentially a virtual company, just a trading name used by the computer science department, with the intention of allowing some students to get work experience within the curriculum, within their course. So it's largely taken by fourth-year students as part of their master's degree, and about 45 credits this year, 40 last year, 45 this year, out of 120, so a little over a third of their final year mark comes from working in Genesys, doing practical software development. And for that they spend about 15 hours a week working with us, 24 weeks, full academic year. And you'll find the description of the module on the web. If you look for COM4525 on our website, you'll see details about what we do, but largely focused on the entire project life cycle, so dealing with customers, dealing with contracts, dealing with actual software development, and then right through to delivery and potentially training the customers. Students work with a lot of the projects are internal to the university, so they work with other departments, with other academic departments, with some of the professional services departments at the university. They've also in the past worked with a lot of external organisations, small businesses, local charities, and often on web-based systems, web applications, information systems. But it's varied over the years, and they've made everything from e-card generators through to e-commerce websites. It went on very successfully for the first few years, and grew, and of course was a big part of the reason for students going to study computer science at Sheffield was gaining some practical experience. Of course, as we all know, employers rarely like to hire students straight out of university, rather they've got some real world experience. And it grew to the point that we had about 40 students a year on the module, and various issues started coming up, various issues with management and with how to run the module within the university when it was clearly becoming less academic in comparison to other parts of the course. So in 2007, the university started to found a spin-out company called epiGenesys, creatively. And essentially this now incorporates Genesys as a student-run division, but adds on to it around 8 staff at the moment. It's growing roughly 2 to 3 staff each year, which are all graduates of the university who all but one have done this module themselves, the exception being someone with a music degree instead. So all very familiar with what our students are doing, what they've done in their course and how they need to apply it. And essentially our staff act as mentors, provide training and coaching to the students. We still have 2 academic staff involved, and they are there because, of course, being part of the curriculum, we need to mark the students, and that needs to be overseen by academics. But obviously with input from our staff, with most of the marking being based around the processes and how the students are going about delivering their project, rather than outputs, as is often the case with modules. We've also got some student apprentices this year, so the first time we've tried this, we've got a couple of second-year students over the summer who have just joined our team, working with our customers, delivering software, and they're very good. They're working on various iPhone apps for the NHS that we're working on at the moment.
Are those paid roles, these students?
Yes, they are. They're paid. So generally the students aren't paid. They're receiving credit towards a degree. It's simply a case of their projects don't earn enough money. I'll come on to that. With the apprentices, yes, they're paid. Only thing to mention there, we're 100% owned by the university, so unlike generally with a university spin-out, the academics running it will often own part of the share, the university will own part may be sold off. We're wholly owned, and the plan is to stay that way, so it's not something that has kind of commercial issues, running it. Very much the goal is the education of the students, but supported by commercial operations. So some of what we do are kind of 4 key values. The first one, that what we do is practitioner-led. So it's run by the 8 staff in epiGenesys. Obviously, we oversight from the academics, but we assist the students in finding the projects and kind of guide them towards the preferred kind of projects, something that we can support going forward. So one of the biggest issues Genesys first had was all the students leave in June, and many of their customers, of course, weren't supported over the summer and into future years. That's something that epiGenesys has been able to help them with, and obviously help them take on bigger projects, but there are still people around. And of course, as you know, the general university course perhaps isn't entirely focused on what a lot of employees are interested in, on project management skills, on customer liaison skills, which is something that we can probably help more with than a traditional module. Second value then, current practices and technologies. So we try and keep with the trends as best we can. I've talked with a few people about this today, I think. A simple example is programming languages, and what programming language we'll be using when these students graduate. And of course, the big issue with the university is that whatever gets taught in the first year, students won't graduate for 4 years, and will that still be a worthwhile skill for them to have? So the university recently introduced PHP as a first year course. So of course, the question for a first year now is will that be a really useful skill for them in 5 years' time? We're quite fortunate dealing with 4th years that we can choose to teach them something this year and they can use it next year. So everything that we do is all based around Ruby. And in part something we feel is very current, but also something different to what they've done for the rest of their course. So mostly Java based at Sheffield, very little .NET, but this is something to add to with the Ruby. It also levels the playing field. So we've got a mix of students that is roughly 50% on a 4-year course at Sheffield and roughly 50% on an MSc course, which is just a 1-year course. The vast majority of those students being international students and often very different skill sets. Students who come from other universities perhaps haven't had the practical background that's part of a Sheffield course for 4 years. So often we'll try and start from the ground up and try and get everyone to the same level. So the third one then, trust our students. So this is our concept of letting the students run their own division, letting them find customers, letting them develop contracts, but of course they have to be signed off by staff, and largely letting them self-organise. Don't need to log into the wireless. That's new. Letting them self-organise and self-manage, and of course it to some extent makes things difficult for us because it's very hard to replicate from 1 year to the next what might happen. But we encourage the students to kind of document their best practice each year and share that with future years, kind of bring some to the company, and obviously input every year ourselves, and then work with various industry partners who offer kind of early on training schemes at the beginning of the year. So that's largely been provided by IBM in the last few years. We tended to visit us a few times a year and run the students through various practical workshops and things. And thankfully, very much a focus on the skills that they can help the students with and not pushing recruitment heavily. And hopefully we'll work with a lot more people in the next few years. I know Fort Works are very keen to work with us, so that's great, thank you. And the last value on there is being honest about our ambitions. So we do tell the students that we're trying to give them real world experience, we're trying to let them see what will happen when they graduate, not just to help them decide that's what they really want to do, but also so they've got that experience when they go out and they can be useful immediately in any organisation. Of course, we do realise that what we're doing is controlled. It isn't quite real. We ask the students not to take on certain projects sometimes. We can kind of see the warning signs coming. And of course, they learn a lot from failure, and we have plenty of those failures. But it is, in the end, a university environment, and we've got to have enough scope there for the students to receive their marks. So kind of taking it as far as we think we can push it, without them, going to work. So the key challenges we think we're facing, as mentioned earlier, you know, there's no funding, schools have got no funding, universities haven't either. We turn that around a little bit, because unlike every other department in the university, we don't receive any central funding from the university. Everything is funded by our staff working on projects. So it's all commercial projects, largely with the public sector, and about half of our time is spent working on those, which funds 100% of our time, so we spend 50% of our time working with the students. So essentially, no cost to the university, they've gained an extra 8 staff to help with their teaching, which is why we can offer the kind of level of mentoring that isn't possible elsewhere, where you may have one lecturer to 100 students. We've got something like one staff member to 10 students, which lets us, you know, kind of support them in a different way with the mentoring and coaching. Second challenge, litigation. So, yeah, it's been interesting working with businesses for the students. And particularly before epiGenesys came around, it was various issues around contracts and around customers who perhaps expected more than was reasonable from a student project, and reached the point of various legal action. So a large part of the reason for having a spin-out company to do all of this is that it removes the risk from the university and kind of contains it, and, you know, where it can be managed as best we can. And thankfully we've been very lucky in the last few years, no problems, but it's unfortunately one of the things that does put a lot of other universities off trying to adapt this kind of approach. You know, there's such risk there. Third challenge then, skills of students. So as I mentioned, we've got a mix of students. Some of them have done a 4-year course at Sheffield. Right from the first year they've been encouraged to do team-based projects. In the second year, they're working with real customers on a very small scale. So we're talking relatively simple websites or maybe an iPhone app. Or equally, we've got a lot of international students who have taken computer science degrees at other universities that are very, very theoretical. Virtually no experience of working in a team, virtually no experience of working with a customer. Although some of them have often done software development, largely Java-based. Simply not able to function as part of a software development project as far as we're concerned. So we obviously have to spend a lot of time dealing with that, and roughly 4 to 6 weeks at the start of each year is training that we offer for all the students collectively. Of course, then throughout the year, trying to assist those students who are struggling more. And one of the things we're trying next year, this year, for the last few years, we've generally mixed the teams and have mixed abilities, generally ensuring that every client will get a piece of software at the end of their project. From next year, we're going to stream the students purely by ability. So there will be some very good teams, there will be some not so good teams. Of course, we'll be working with clients on that and explaining that it's entirely possible at the end of their project they might get nothing. Of course, if they don't, we won't charge them. And they're generally paying somewhere around £3,000 per project. So they're getting a team of 4 to 6 students over 24 weeks, a couple of days a week. It's a lot of man days, not a lot of money, so it's part of the risk that they need to take. And that's something that, of course, is just being dealt with through legal means, because in the past we've often ended up fixing those projects ourselves. Of course, that's not feasible going forwards. The last challenge we face is number of students. So lots of people have mentioned that they've done mentoring, lots of organisations taking on students on apprentices as apprentices. The issue we've got is that we can't take 1 or 2, we've got at least 40 over the last few years, and these numbers are going up every year. So that's starting from the previous academic year, then last year and going forward. So you can see we had around 40 students, about 60 last year, and anything up to 80 maybe this year, pushing 90 in the next couple of years. Of course, what we've got to do is somehow scale what we're trying to do so that we're still giving the same experience, so that we don't have to kind of dial back into something more exam-based that is simply easy to deal with on a large scale, but isn't resulting in the same level of experience for the students. There's a breakdown on there as well showing you some of the different types of students, with the top couple of blocks being third-year students. This is something new in the last couple of years, where our students are coming through on an IT management for business course, and so they're working within Genesys alongside the fourth year students who are mainly focused on software development, with the third years taking on some of the other business roles, so looking at analysis, looking at working with clients, maybe looking at some of the financials and those kind of things, which essentially helps the students focus. I think last year most of the third years were asked to write user manuals, so the fourth years didn't have to. And this last illustration is Genesys students against epiGenesys staff. So with the mentoring, we think we need to get to about 5 students per staff member so that we can offer something genuinely useful. This year we were somewhere around 10. Hopefully by 2013, 2014 we'll have got that down to 5. But of course this is based entirely on us taking on quite a great deal of commercial work so that we can fund increasing our headcount. So we can do that going forward. And of course with the increasing student numbers, that's getting harder and harder every year. And probably the way it's going to go, especially with the way the funding is going with universities, that we need quite a lot of students to keep the courses running. So yeah, it's a huge challenge for us. Okay.
So I've got a quick question. We talked this morning about the lack of computing and the discipline of computing and all the problems we've got in the schools coming through. And you mentioned that one of your challenges is more in the whole development life cycle of team working and how projects are run. In your experience of the people coming through, do you see that which is the bigger problem? Is it the teamwork and software development that's the biggest problem for you? Or is it that people are coming through without the computing skills really necessary to do work?
Okay, so probably computing skills is quite a wide definition there. So generally, students taking a computer science degree, the computing skills are there, and having taken a 3-year course before we even see them, the skills are generally pretty good, and they can deal with the majority of things. We're left teaching the higher level stuff, teaching things like system architecture, there's kind of responsive systems and maybe usability kind of areas. Kind of what we see is maybe the higher level areas. It's interesting actually hearing about schools earlier about some of the things that are going into the game design. Maybe those thought processes that aren't necessarily programming. Those are kind of things that we do have to deal with quite a lot that we don't necessarily see come through as early. Definitely what are often called the softer skills, the non-technical skills, are definitely things that very rarely someone arrives and quickly at university with that somewhat experience.
When you say you teach these higher level skills, are you teaching this as part of the work they're doing in epiGenesys, or is this part of the Sheffield course?
So it does come up in various modules and various ones where they're working on teamwork, but largely the focus is the project they're doing with epiGenesys. Team-based project that lasts over an academic year.
So a question of interest to people in this room, I'm sure, will be, we know from the last 10, 20 years of software development about a bunch of things like test-driven development, integration, source code. Is that all part of the environment of epiGenesys?
Yes.
So
as I said, we're very keen to keep this current. So things like test-driven development, behavior-driven development, continuous integration are all technical skills that we teach them right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning.
The whole thing is trying to adopt agile practices.
Because that's been a common complaint from industry about people coming out of computer science degrees, is that they may know how to prove quicksort, but they can't sit down and code. They don't know about source code control, they don't know about test-driven development, they don't know about input stuff.
Yeah, definitely. The intention here is absolutely application of those theoretical skills that have been learnt earlier in the course. And we've had various visits from industry, from local organisations and ISPs to come have a look at actually some of the things that perhaps we're doing with students that aren't yet necessarily happening in industry. So there is a verification and testing research group at the university that's kind of pushing some ways of advancing what we're doing right now, which we do try to get in as well, so the students are well prepared. But yeah, absolutely, those kind of keys, technical skills, definitely part of what we do.
Your model of working really closely with the university department is a great one, because I kind of wonder sometimes whether, when you hear people in the industry, and this includes in Microsoft, saying if only students came out of universities with better sort of soft skills and working with customers and big systems, all that, it's not obvious to me that you can actually teach that stuff very well in a university setting, because it's kind of not credible. It's even incredible, right? Whereas in your setting, it's absolutely credible, but they needed to get the job done. So I kind of, this kind of close partnership you're describing, that's fantastic. But I also wonder whether maybe industry just has to bite the bullet to say some of these kind of skills we should expect to have to teach, because we cannot expect a university environment to deliver that except in the kind of partnership you're describing.
Do we think that I mean, should this be much more common? I mean, obviously,
yeah, we talked about this earlier with a few people. We do get quite a few visits, probably 2 or 3 a year, from other universities who are interested in what we do and how we do it, and can they take the model and adopt it. I know a couple of the Scottish universities are looking at it, in the early stages. University of Chester have got a programme that's very similar to us. They have a spin-out company. They're doing the commercial work already. They're not yet doing the teaching, and they're looking at whether they can expand into that.
Is there a similar experience abroad?
It's not very widespread abroad. There's one university in the States that has something that's similar, except it's largely based around working with one commercial organisation, and they happen to have developed a product as part of a university project. The organisation's adopted it and reselling it across the country, so their students and employees maintaining and expanding that project, but not as a software company working on a variety of projects. It's still very unique.
I've seen an interesting project in Finland called Team Academy, which you've probably heard of, which is not software focused, but it's very much entrepreneurial, startup focused. And as part of your degree, you actually have to go and work in a startup, many of which are tech focused. And they've had amazing success, and they've got people coming up with a lot of the kind of commercial and communication skills that they need.
Yeah, we can absolutely see where this could move into other disciplines, and there's a lot of talk in the university. Can we replicate the model in other departments, and at some point have these spin-outs from various disciplines actually collaborating and kind of their own, their own commercial sector in the university at some point. I don't know whether that's appropriate for university there, and that's probably the biggest question. Should universities be teaching to that level, or should that be this fourth year that is essentially a year in industry for our students, or should they go straight into industry?
The nearest thing is a sandwich course, isn't it?
Yeah.
Chris, a couple of quick questions that occurred to me. First of all, maybe I missed it on the slides, but do the students work with experienced practitioners? Are there any sort of dyed-in-the-wall commercial software developers that get involved, or is it students and teachers mainly?
We're working towards that, so it's happened more in the last year. So maybe in the first couple of years, it was largely students working with some guidance, but not with a staff developer sat next to them. That's happened more in the last year as we've had a bigger team and been able to kind of send people over to be with the students on a more of a full-time basis. It's purely down to numbers. I had a dozen or so students assigned to me last year, and haven't got the time to spend with all of them. But that's definitely what we want to work towards, of having teams with a staff member as part of that team.
Could staying on and working for epiGenesys be an option after you complete your studies?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we hire all our staff straight out of our graduates. It gives us a really clear idea of who we're going to hire. It's essentially a year-long interview, and yeah, people do move on after a couple of years with us, move on into other organisations.
As well as universities benefiting from this model, is it possible that existing commercial organisations could also benefit from maybe to some extent emulating how learning is built into what you do? Could a company like Seven Digital, for example, or a tech startup, borrow some lessons as to how they structure, how they work, to get more learning out of it?
Yeah, that was interesting. We were talking about earlier, weren't we? And one of the things being the bottom line being an issue in the business, and what we do with the students wouldn't be viable if we were just running a student organisation. It doesn't make enough money to pay for one staff member to be there. It is purely through the commercial work, and through the fact that we're very lucky we have a particular niche market, and it's through very close involvement with a university department specialising in clinical trials that we happen to be able to offer that particular a particular kind of skill set that lets us fund this. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to spend the time, and that's probably the biggest issue in industry. Can you afford to have people working on projects that probably have a much increased chance of failure? And can you sell that to people?
So one question I had was, the students come into your program and then leave. After they've left, do you keep in touch with them? See where they go, what they do?
We try to, and we're very, James is with me today. He's was our student 3 years ago. So from us went on to work in a college in a technical role the last couple of years. Thankfully we stayed in touch with James and he's come back to rejoin this year, and we're certainly looking to increase that. A lot of our graduates end up in all the big organisations we expect to hear of, and lots of local organisations in the region. And certainly, obviously, once they've been out and gained additional skills in the industry, we'd love them to come back and work for us. Yeah, we do our best to stay in touch with them. It's relatively informal at the moment. Something that we're looking to address, the university looking to address it, why we stay in touch with alumni.
A lot of the questions that Jason and Simon asked are sort of about the culture. I think come down to the culture in the company. If you are it's always ex-students who are the staff members, the culture builds up that is like just the rest of the software industry. Every company has its own culture. What would be nice is if we could find a way of bringing some of that culture back from the larger software development organizations, such as Google, such as Microsoft, such as all the people we have to get back around, make that loop much bigger, so that you bring that back, not just with your company, but with university education as a whole, to get some of the experience that people have in large-scale software development back into just a flavor, at least, of that. Is this kind of company a way of doing some of that, or a vehicle for some of that?
I'd like to think so. What we do in the industry now isn't at that point. It isn't necessarily bringing back the culture. It's generally focus workshops, days worth of training, not to that level. I'd like to think that we could maybe do that. I don't know what the route is for doing that.
Here's a suggestion. Go along to a meeting at the conference of heads of university computer sciences. I mean, they're steering committee, it's just a dozen people or so. So that's the heads of department of all the computer science departments in the country, or their reps anyway. And I'm sure they'd like to hear about it. But, their business is university computer science education. You want to tell them something about what you've learned. And I'm sure that, and maybe on a broader picture, just like Alan's saying, how could we pick up?
But then you've got then it's got to be the heads of the big companies as well.
That's right. Yeah.
To get
I think if the heads of the big companies thought that they could actually make a difference, they might be willing to devote some time to it.
Chris, can I ask, if you think about things like science park spin-off companies next to universities, what stops you emulating for the software development what they have done for things like ARM and so on? What's preventing that sort of route?
Absolutely, yeah. That is purely down to our agreement and our board being very clear that we don't want to do that because we think we'll lose the education if we become that commercial. So simply staying wholly owned by the university, not selling out.
But in a way, you're not limiting what you could do and would achieve and get closer to the reality by going into that sort of science park model.
Absolutely, I'm sure we are.
Sorry if that's an inappropriate question.
I'm sure we are limiting what we can do, and I think that's a conscious decision that we're doing something different to what industry is doing now. It's not happening in industry. We're not sure how to make it happen in industry. We can make it happen at this scale by limiting it in this way.
But would you see that as a possible route through for somewhere else to take what you've done and take it further?
Absolutely. I think the whole education system is about handovers, isn't it? And actually having that something to fill that gap, maybe that one more step for industry. Yeah.
Folks, really sorry again because we're up against it. Chris, thank you very, very much.